Hello everyone, today in this video we will fight against the atmos character of our world around us, and today we will confront one quite common misconception. Nowadays people think that in the past, like 100 years ago, or in medieval times, or in antiquity, anywhere around the world, time, in quotation, was running slower, pace of the events was slower, and not so much was happening in the given amount of time. Because nowadays, due to the misinformation techniques and the flood of informations we are receiving from media, we think that world is a crazy place where so many things are happening at the same time, and actually we are also receiving many versions of the same event and we don't know what's true. This is the fact, but now, even if we look at the ancient chronic sources, and now I'm not talking only about narrative sources like chronics or memories of the participants of the events or works of the old historians that we are lucky to have, but now, thanks to archaeology and also natural sciences and physical sciences, we can have very often a new insight into old events, and we can know even more in most cases. Yeah, like one of the most detailed chronics we have in history are Chinese chronics. Just not to go far, I will just recall actually it's not a chronic written by one guy, but compilation of chronics by Sima Qian, the Chinese historian from the 2nd and 1st century BC, called Chinese Herodotus. His chronics are the great sources for the Chinese history, especially to the reign of the first emperor Qin Shi Huangdi and the wars that followed this time, but also to some other period preceding these events, and they are incredibly detailed. And reading these chronics, we see that despite the fact the population of China and the world itself was far lower than today, many events were taking place more or less in the same time or within few years. So we also see that many things were happening. The same we can say for the antiquity times, classical antiquity in Europe, Greece and Rome, when we read Herodotus, Thucydides, or when we support these findings with numismatics, archaeology, and so on, numismatic study of the coins, and so on, we see that also within the span of few years many things happened, and this also fits to the Hellenistic period, one of my favorite, for which very often we have only accessible fragmentary primary narrative sources, because not all of them were preserved, or some of them were preserved only as extracts done by other historians, or summaries or compilations done by other historians. Like we have something like the library of Diodorus Sicylicus, so Diodorus the Sicilian, the Greek-speaking guy of also Greek origin living in Sicily in 1st century BC, who was compiling many works he found by other historian within his so-called library. Or from the ancient also times, but late antiquity, we have such compilations like Breviarias of Aurelius Victor, so these are extracts and summaries of the previous Latin historians whose works were not so lucky to be preserved in large fragments or in the entire form like some other historians. We are lucky to have huge chunk of work of Ammianus Marcellinus that covers the years of his own life, and we see that even if we read these narrative works from these times, which are not well documented, like Hellenistic period or 4th and 5th century AD, we see that despite the fact we have fragmentaric sources, we can have the evidence of many events taking place in the same time. And even if we read Res Gestes, so the Historias by Ammianus Marcellinus, the guy from the 4th century, also of Greek origin, surprisingly from Antiochia, the serviceman under Julian the Apostate, when we read his work, we also see that he reports many clashes on the borders with barbarians. And at one point he mentions that he doesn't mention many events, these clashes, that took place because they were of minor meaning and they didn't involve many people. So the minor events that happened, the clashes between Roman servicemen at Limes, the border fortifications, and the barbaric tribes, or the smallest expeditions done by Romans to the barbaric territory or by barbarians to Roman territory, some kilometers deep, this side or the other, he doesn't mention, because then he would lose track in his narrative, in his source, and he wouldn't be focused on the important events. That's why we see that so many events were also happening there, and even if great historians like Ammianus Marcellinus, made their selection of facts to present us the narrative of Roman state and politics, he did it extremely well. This is the last great monument, let's say, of ancient historiography, fulfilling all features of being great historical work of reason. Despite this selection he made, still we have access to many events that happened. So we see that despite the fact populations were much lower, but still the number of events that were happening in the short span of time was incredibly high, almost like today. So the only difference is that people those days were not bombarded with useless information, and information it's not a fact. This we need to remember. Here I just advise you to read some works about misinformation by Mr. Vladimir Volkov. And we need to see that these people from the past were able enough, were smart enough, that this smartness made them able, and life experience, to filter important information for them and information that it's not important. That's why they were avoiding, to a large extent, very nicely, the informational mess and the actually brain collapse, I would say. So they were still able to follow the main events and being aware what's happening in their own surroundings or with their own state, if they were intellectuals and so on, but they were not bothered with many informations that are meaningless. So the difference between us and them is that they were able to filter important information from the informations that are not important. And this ability, to a large extent, we lost nowadays, and we need to regain it again to be able to live normally and to be more prone to the propaganda of current governments and managers of big corporations that want to fool us to the bone and made us stupid and exploit us till the end. All the best, have a nice day, bye.